This happened a few years ago when I was 20, I think. I was going on a road trip of sorts with a really good friend of mine and his family. Our destination was a concert in a neighboring country, but we planned to stop for the night and sleep in the camper we were driving. We hadn't crossed the border yet when we stopped at the first campsite for the night. It seemed like a pretty family-friendly and safe place, so none of us had our guards up. That night, at about 11 p.m. or so, while my friend and his family were getting ready for bed, I went outside to get some fresh air. Our camper was parked almost right next to the beach, so I decided to walk down to the shore, dip my feet in the water, and enjoy some much-needed quiet time by myself. On the way there, I passed by a beach shack. As I stood there, letting the waves lap over my feet, I noticed the silhouette of a man further down the beach. Since it was a public space for campers, I didn't think much of it. I got absorbed in splashing the water with my feet and enjoying the moonlight. After a while, I decided to make my way back. It was very dark, given the late hour, but I don't scare easily. Now, as a woman in the modern world, I usually stay on guard after dark, but that thought never occurred to me since I felt safe being so close to the campsite. As I was walking back, I noticed that the silhouette of the man further down the beach was gone. Even more worrying, though, was that as I neared the beach shack, I saw someone trying to hide from my view behind it. I immediately went on alert and called a friend I knew would be awake. I gave the shack a wide berth, talking loudly to my friend about how she was coming to meet me. After a short while, I made it back safely to the campsite and hopped into bed in the caravan. I didn't tell my friend or his family, even though I was scared. I figured there could be many logical, non-threatening explanations for what I saw. I put it out of my mind, and the rest of the trip went off without a hitch. About a year or so later, I was talking to my friend about the trip and suddenly remembered that creepy experience. As I told him, he slowly went pale and told me something his brother had mentioned to their family over breakfast a few months after the trip. That same night, after I'd gone to bed, his brother had gotten up late to get some water. When he passed the window by his bed, he saw a man standing right outside, looking in. As soon as the man realized he had been seen, he left. It definitely creeped his brother out, but like me, he seemed to put it out of his mind. Now with both of our stories, it doesn't seem far-fetched that the man hiding by the beach shack had followed me back. I really don't like to think about what might have happened if I had been alone. I was 16 and on a road trip to Florida with my best friend Cal and my parents. We decided to stop at a cheap motel in West Virginia to sleep for the night. We got there around 10 p.m., and since Cal and I were two teenage girls who had been sitting in a car for most of the day, we were still pretty wound up. We started exploring the motel and ran into a group of guys with thick southern accents. They tried their hand at some awkward teenage flirting before giving up. I'll never forget Cal's excuse for not giving out her number. She told them she'd accidentally microwaved her phone last month. We all laughed and parted ways, realizing they were just normal, albeit awkward teenage boys. Cal and I kept exploring the hotel floors, and eventually, we decided to race each other down the main hallway on the first floor, which was right next to the lobby. As we were laughing and speeding down the hallway, we passed by a room with the door wide open. Since I was running at full speed, all I saw was a bunch of shiny things scattered across the floor in front of the doorway, and a big blurry shape in the middle of it all. When we reached the end of the hallway, we both stopped and asked each other, "What the hell was that?" Curious, we sneaked back slowly and peeked around the corner. In the doorway of the room, there was this really obese man lying on his stomach with his chin resting on his hands, like he was trying to look cute or something. All around him were pieces of silverware and tiny metal trinkets spread out on the floor. When he noticed us, he smiled weirdly, but didn't move anything except his torso, twisting slightly to face us better. We sprinted back to my parents' room, but they were out getting food, so we were alone. We freaked out and made fun of the situation for about 15 minutes before deciding to go back downstairs. On the stairway from the second floor, we ran into the same group of boys we'd met earlier. One of them asked if we had seen the weird guy downstairs. When we said yes, the boys started freaking out. One of the guys told us that his little brother, I'm not sure how old, had been walking down the hallway from their room on the other end of the first floor to the vending machines when that weird guy called out to him. The man asked if he wanted to come into his room and offered him one of his strange trinkets. Thankfully, the kid had the good sense to say, "No friggin' thanks." What was that guy trying to do by luring a kid into his room? I think the hotel manager eventually stepped in and made the man close his door. I hope the kid's parents complained or called the cops. At the time, I was too young to fully understand how messed up the situation was. So to make light of it, Cal and I nicknamed the man the Wiggling West Virginia Spoonman. It made for a wild story that nobody believed when we got back to school after the break. I live in Southern Oregon. My county is huge and sparsely populated, with mountains to the north and desert in the south and east. My buddy Donnie lives about a half hour from town, around 10 minutes from a resort on a lake in a heavily forested area. One evening, I drove out to hang out with Donnie, and we had plans to take my Land Cruiser down some dirt roads. He mentioned knowing a Forest Service road off the highway that led up a mountain and ended at a fire watch tower. It was fairly late in the afternoon when we took off, and the sun was already behind the mountains, so the light was fading. We left Donnie's house, hit the highway, and after a short drive, turned onto the Forest Service road, heading uphill. After a few miles, we had to stop abruptly because a Cat front-end loader was parked across the road. It had been purposely parked to block the road, positioned perfectly perpendicular, with logs dragged onto the shoulders to block any way around. "This wasn't here the other day," Donnie said. "Let's try to get around." We got out of the cruiser. The woods were nearly dark and eerily silent, except for the wind rustling through the pine trees. There was no easy way around the loader without potentially damaging the Land Cruiser. We decided to head back down the road to find another route up the mountain. After a short drive down the gravel road, we found a promising trail that bypassed the loader, allowing us to continue uphill. We took the trail, and soon enough, we saw the loader again through the trees. Feeling satisfied, we continued on toward the fire towers. We hadn't gone far when we noticed something strange. A shipping container sitting off the road, back among the trees. "That definitely wasn't there the other day," Donnie muttered under his breath. By this point, I was starting to feel uneasy. The woods were unnaturally still, even for the evening. The weather had been nice, there should have been birds and small animals moving around. Curiosity got the best of us, so we decided to investigate the container. I drove the cruiser through the brush and up to it. The container was nondescript, tan, with no markings, and the doors were padlocked shut. We sat there for several minutes, uneasy and on edge as the woods grew darker. Finally, I made the decision to leave. I turned the cruiser back toward the road and started heading downhill. Dude, there are guys in the brush," Donnie yelled, snapping me out of my thoughts. Sure enough, 3 men were running uphill through the brush, alarmingly close to us. I quickly yanked the wheel and pulled the cruiser onto a side road, my heart pounding. What the hell? Who were they? I shouted, panic setting in. My stomach dropped when I realized the road we had taken was a loop, bringing us right back to where we had just been. As we shot out of the side trail and back onto the main gravel road, I saw one of the men less than 10 feet from the cruiser. These guys knew the woods. They must have known the trail would bring us back to them. "Hang on," I yelled as I jerked the wheel again, dodging around the man in the road. His companions rushed toward the road from the brush. I floored it, pushing the Land Cruiser for everything it had. Trees and brush whipped past in the bright headlights as we raced toward the highway. We finally hit the pavement and decided not to head toward Donnie's house. Instead, we took the highway back toward town. "Where did they come from?" Donnie asked. Thinking back, I hadn't seen any other vehicles, lights, or RVs in the woods where 3 people could have been hiding. They just appeared, running out of the brush after we started poking around the container. Donnie had been up to the fire towers just a week earlier, and none of this had been there. We had gone several miles when I noticed headlights approaching fast from behind. They were still a ways back, but gaining on us quickly. I accelerated, determined not to get caught. We rounded a bend, and I slammed on the brakes, driving the truck into the woods again and cutting the lights. Moments later, a truck sped past us, flying down the highway. We waited a few minutes before cautiously pulling back onto the highway. We took some back roads and eventually made it back to Donnie's house. Thankfully, we weren't followed. We also didn't see anything unusual when we passed the spot where we had originally turned off. To this day, I don't know why those guys were in the woods, or why they chased us. But two things are for sure. They didn't want us there, and we have no plans of going back. This frightening situation happened during Thanksgiving break. My friend Angela and I were high school acquaintances, but became really close during college since we were from the same city, and started interacting more because of that. Naturally, we carpooled to and from our university, which is around 5 hours away from our hometown. At the end of Thanksgiving break, we left around 11 p.m. and started our trip back. Around 3 hours into the road trip, Angela, the driver, told me that she was starting to feel a bit sleepy. Rather than stopping in the middle of nowhere to switch seats, I decided to keep her awake by talking to her. We got into a really deep conversation, and for fun, we started Snapchatting parts of the road trip with the flashlight on. I know, stupid. After laughing and Snapchatting, we suddenly saw police sirens behind us. It was 2 a.m. and the cops were pulling us over. They stayed in their car for a few minutes, which seemed odd, but we didn't think much of it. Then I noticed two officers walking towards us, whispering something to each other. One went to Angela's window, and the other to mine. "Hey there, ladies," the one by Angela's window said, with this creepy smile. "How are y'all doing tonight?" Unsuspecting, Angela responded that we were good, and then asked what the reason was for pulling us over. Going over the speed limit, he claimed. Mind you, we had been Snapchatting just before, and Angela was purposely driving a little under the speed limit to be safe. Confused, she just said, "Okay," and asked if he needed any documentation, to which he responded, "No." Meanwhile, the second cop signaled for me to lower my window, which I did. He started making insinuating comments and gestures, like pointing his flashlight towards my crotch, while smiling and commenting on how long my legs were. Probably because I was wearing shorts. He asked, "Oh, so it's just you two?" "I see." And made comments about what we were doing out here in the middle of nowhere. Questions that had nothing to do with pulling us over and were completely inappropriate for police officers to be asking. Then the first cop asked, "Are y'all in college?" We responded, "Yes, actually, we're heading to university name." I immediately knew we'd messed up, because now they knew we weren't heading anywhere close. He then said, "College girls, huh?" to the other cop, again with that eerie smile. At this point, we were beyond creeped out and wanted to get out of the situation, but they wouldn't let us go. They kept making small talk, all while implying really weird and borderline sexual things like, "Y'all know where we are? There's a prison nearby. I sure hope nothing happens to you ladies, and do you think anyone would know if something happened to you out here, all alone on this road?" They kept smiling as they said this, and I was in shock. These were the men we're supposed to trust, but here we were, trying to free ourselves for our own safety. Wanting to end it, I asked, "Are we getting a ticket?" The cop by Angela's window said, "No, but I'll give you a verbal warning." At the same time, I could feel the other cop staring right at me. He wrote something in his notepad and said, "Y'all be careful now. Wouldn't want anything bad to happen to you pretty ladies, right?" Then the cop by my window suddenly tried to open the door. Out of nowhere. Thankfully, the doors were locked, and my window wasn't low enough for him to reach in and manually unlock the door. I just stared at him, completely in shock, while he stared back, offering no explanation. Angela quickly started the car, said, "Thank you, have a good night," and sped off. We didn't call our parents right away because it was the middle of the night, and we didn't want to worry them. Instead, we called Angela's boyfriend, who was already waiting for us at the university, and had asked to be updated in case of anything. After driving in silence for about 30 minutes, constantly checking to see if they were following us, I finally started talking to Angela. We were both shaken and speechless. I asked her, why did they stop us if we didn't do anything wrong? Then we realized they must have seen we were two girls because of the stupid flashlight I used while recording. They probably stayed in their car for a bit to confirm it was just us two. The whole situation felt uncomfortable, and we wouldn't have been surprised if they had planned something worse. Honestly, I don't know what would have happened if the doors weren't locked, and I don't want to even imagine it. I'm a proud Floridian. At the time of this story, early 2000s, I was attending college in South Florida, while my family lived in my hometown in the Florida Panhandle. It's about a 7-hour drive up through Central Florida to travel between the two places, so I mostly only went home for the holidays. It was the Thanksgiving of my junior year, and I was excited because I had managed to rearrange my midterms to leave campus 3 days ahead of everyone else. I was expecting to beat the heavy holiday traffic and was hoping for a quick trip back home. My roommates and I wanted to have one last meal together before we all left for break, so we ate in the campus dining hall around 4 p.m., and I set off on my journey around 5:30 p.m. By around 10 p.m., I had just passed the 2/3 mark of my trip. There was this little mom-and-pop diner along the highway where I always stopped to grab a snack, use the restroom, and call my dad to let him know I was okay, since I didn't have a cell phone at the time. When I got there, I was bummed to find that the place had gone out of business since the summer. No chocolate chip pancakes for me. Since there wasn't much else around, I decided to keep going. Eventually, I saw signs for a rest stop in, of all places, some bumfuck town called 𝐐𝐿. So I decided to stop there. I parked directly under a streetlight for safety, used the facilities, and called my dad, etc. I didn't see anyone else around except for a very exhausted-looking woman who approached me asking for directions. She said she was with her husband and 2 small children, and they'd made a wrong turn trying to get to Disney. They were from Virginia. As I was walking back to my car, I noticed a beat-up, unmarked gray or bluish work van parked uncomfortably close to the driver's side of my '95 Honda Civic. That seemed pretty weird to me. The van had Florida tags, so it couldn't have been the woman's, since I distinctly remembered she said she was from Virginia. Feeling uneasy, I turned around and headed back to the rest stop. There, I ran into a middle-aged man with 2 little boys. After talking to him, I found out that he was the woman's husband. She came out of the bathroom a moment later, and I felt comfortable explaining what was going on with the van and how I didn't know what to do. He offered to check it out. Leaving his kids with his wife, he confidently walked up to the driver's side of the van. A moment passed before he spoke, his voice awkwardly quivering, but we could hear him yell from where we were standing. "Excuse me, gentlemen, we already called the police, so I'm going to have to politely suggest that you get out of here." Then he sprinted back to us, grabbed his wife and kids, pointed at me with a sharp U, and said, "Come on, let's all get in the car now." We all ran together. So there I was, confusedly, sitting in the back of a stranger's SUV, while the man went to the payphone to presumably call the police. Meanwhile, the van peeled out of there. I've never seen anyone get the hell out of a place as fast as they did. They even jumped the curb on their way out, burning rubber. It was almost comical how fast they took off. When the cops arrived, I found out what had happened. The man had gotten a good look into the van because I had parked under the streetlight. He noticed that all the seats except for the driver's seat had been removed. There was a guy sitting in the driver's seat and another guy in the back. A tarp was laid out in the back, along with some other random items he couldn't immediately identify. Neither of the men was looking at a map or a newspaper. Nothing. They were just sitting there. It still makes me sick thinking about it.